Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of Talking Cardboard. As always, my name is Cory.
And I'm John.
And if you like the content you see here on the channel, please consider subscribing. We'd really appreciate it. And on today's video, we are reviewing the much anticipated hot game, Dune Imperium. Let's get started. All right, and like we said, we are reviewing the game Dune Imperium, and John is going to go over how to play the game.
Yeah, so to start it off, this is obviously themed around Dune, the books, which will soon be a movie.
Yep.
This game is actually super unique in that it is a mix of worker placement, deck building, guess to some extent area control with the way this conflict works. Each turn consists of drawing 5 cards like you would in any normal deck builder. And then the only difference is you have 2 to 3 agents that you are sending out to the spaces on the board. And to send them out, you actually use a card in your hand that has icons on what spaces they can be used to actually send your agent to. And that's kind of where the worker placement comes in. By sending your workers out, you're gaining, spice or solarium, which is essentially money in this game, or water, which is very precious on the planet. Or the last kind of resource you're getting through worker placement are more troops for your garrison that you eventually send out to the conflict. The second part of the play phase involves you revealing the rest of the cards in your hand, which then includes some extra attack power that could add to the conflict, or are your influence, which you are then using to buy more cards for your deck out of the buy row or the market, like a traditional deck builder. The last phase of the turn before cleanup is the actual conflict itself, and that's where you're just comparing how many troops each of the players have put into the conflict zone, and then doling out rewards based on who plays first, second, or third.
Yeah.
So that's really sums up the game, and the main objective is just to get to 10 points. Whoever gets there first triggers the end game, and from there you can still, get above 10, but it kind of triggers the last turn. So that's kind of the game in a nutshell.
Yeah. So kind of a lot to unpack there. I guess starting with the pros. My first pro, being that I'm more of a mechanisms type of guy, are the gameplay mechanisms. Yep. Through John's explanation, it does sound like there is a lot to the game, and there is quite a bit. There's a lot of moving parts to the game, but I just love the way the mechanisms gel so well. Everything plays so smoothly together. After the first couple rounds of the game, you really start to see how everything works together and combos off itself, and there's just so much to do. So many paths to victory, so many different options, and every game we've played has been different. So I just love the replayability as well. There's a lot to love. Very
strongly agree with that. I mean, the main mechanic is the deck building, but off of that, obviously, like I said before, is your worker placement and area control. But really it all stems out of how you build your deck and what cards you're putting in there and making sure not to flood your deck with meaningless cards. But this game also does a good job, I think, providing ways to trash cards without a lot of drawback. Which I thought that was really cool. One of my bigger pros was 4 different factions you're trying to build your influence with and gain alliances with. They all provide so each faction has 2 spaces that are tied with them, and each time you move to one of those spaces, you get influence with that faction. And the benefits for all those factions are wildly different and super powerful. But they all have kind of a niche play style for that faction. So if you're going with the Fremen, that's where you're gaining your water and troops, and the other factions like the Emperor faction, they're providing money and taking in spice to give you money and troops and the intrigue cards, which we haven't even talked about yet.
So each faction is just wildly different, and on its surface too, when you first look at the different factions and the different worker placement spots you can go to, at first glance some of them might seem more underpowered, some of them might seem more overpowered, but really the game is well balanced. You might go to a worker placement spot associated with one of those factions and think, oh, I'm only gaining a water to do this, but for example in the Fremen, you're also gaining that influence. And after 2 influence gained for one of the factions, that's the first threshold to get a point already, and that's 1 out of the 10 points you need for the entire game. In a 4-player game, you really only need 9 points to trigger the game's end, so 1/9 of the game could be over within the first couple turns. So those points are huge, and it feels like a constant struggle and fight for each and every point throughout the entire game. Like in the 3-4 times we've played this game, I have not lost interest once
Right. Yep.
while playing throughout any of the 2 hours of the gameplay.
And I think for the most part, all our games have been really, really close.
Yeah.
And we've played this both with 3 players and 4 players. And granted, the first learning game, someone did, fall behind. But in the end, I think it came down to a tiebreaker, our first game, on who won.
Yep.
And that it's all just decided by, like, who has the most spice. And then from there, it goes to other resources.
Tiebreaker for a couple of the games.
Yeah, right. And actually, our second game also went to a tiebreaker,
Yep.
which was also spice, and I think that's the one where I beat you literally by one spice. Yeah.
Yep.
So
And another time was maybe a 1 to 2 point spread, or a couple point spread.
I think it was 2-point spread between all 4 of us in the last game we played.
So super tight.
Another really cool thing about this game, like I think the second and third game I played, I felt like I was really at a disadvantage for most of the game because I hadn't bought my extra worker, but like we're saying, like everything's super powerful that you can do, whether it's getting your guys out on the board or building your deck, and the games are very, very close and competitive.
Yeah, and there, touch up really quickly too, not to really beat a dead horse or anything, but like the decision making is just so tight in this game, even with the cards itself. There's multiple use for the cards, either for sending out that agent to a worker placement spot or for utilizing it for when you reveal your hand at the end. So that kind of decision making with what to do with each specific card is really tough.
Right,
really
exactly,
tight.
It is.
Yeah.
Another cool thing and mechanic involved in this game are intrigue cards that you can earn through a certain faction and some of the other spots on Dune. And the intrigue cards are kind of like throw all the thinking and planning and whatever to the wind and introduce crazy, basically instants, if you like play Magic or whatever, that you can play during combat or during your turn that gain you influence with one of the factions, or they modify your combat score, provide end game points. And I think those are really cool because they can really be a surprise swing at a critical point of the game that, could keep someone from getting to that 10-point threshold, or maybe get you there all of a sudden when people thought maybe you were having a weaker turn and really you knew what you were doing to make the most out of those intrigue cards. So I think that was a really cool aspect to this game.
Yeah, and again, at first glance, some people might think that adds some luck to the game or some imbalance or imperfections, but really it doesn't, because you know what everybody is doing when they're going after those intrigue cards. They are planning to have that kind of in-your-face, got you moment type of deal.
Right, and it kind of forces you to play a little more cautious and be more prepared on your end, too, because you just know something can swing all of a sudden. You have to be prepared to account for that.
Yeah, definitely. So what about like teachability or replayability?
And replayability is extremely high. I mean, every time we played this, the game's played out differently. People go for different strategies, or you kind of have to adapt based on the number of players playing and what spaces are available for you to use with your workers. So I think we're playing this with 8 different heroes, and it's going to be high. Like, you're always going to have something new happen.
Even out of the box, without any expansions yet,
Yeah.
every game has been different.
Yep. The heroes mix things up. The intrigue cards mix things up. Just turn order, like, changes things. Like, just...
Yeah, even more so in a 4-player
Right,
game.
exactly. Since everything's so tight and spaces are getting eaten up, you just have to modify your strategy constantly.
Yep. Rolling into teachability too. It's fairly easy to teach. I wouldn't say it's the simplest of teaches, not for the new gamer, but even for us, I mean, it took a couple rounds of the first game to really get the hang of the flow of the game. But after you get kind of that general flow down and really can kind of get a feel for how the game evolves with each turn too, and how the combos start working together, I think it's fairly easy to grasp after that.
Right. I mean, even this last play session we played 2 games, and we had invited someone over that typically doesn't even play board games at all, and he picked up the first game pretty easily. I mean, he did fall behind towards the end of the game, but the second game we played, you could tell, like, now that he understood how all the mechanics work, he was grinding through strategies, and I think he got second or at least third. I know he didn't win, but still, he was right there in the mix of things with everyone else already by the second game.
In complexity, I'd put that kind of what John said, more of the middleweight type of genre of game where the complexity really lies within the various moving parts. It's not like the game is hard to do certain things, it's just so many different moving parts at first.
I also think you really have to be able to adapt your strategy in this game.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't something you can just say, okay, this is my strategy and that's all I'm doing. You're going to have to take suboptimal moves at times, but you're going to have to realize, how is this best going to affect your game going forward?
Yeah, and even if a strategy worked for you in a prior game, it might not work for you at all in the next game. So that's really cool. So now rolling into our cons, I guess to really squeeze one con out of the game, if I'm really trying hard, I would have to say that kind of a race to 10 points is not really my thing. I more of like the kind of the more point salad games where the most points at the end of the game decides the winner. But again, that's really squeezing it out of this game because it didn't really bother me that much. Right. It's just one of those things that once you get to 10 points, it ends the game.
And honestly, if you wanted to do a house rule, you could make it so the game ends after the conflict cards are emptied out. And you could play till 10 rounds or whatever, how many conflict cards there are. So I think there are an option to house rule away some of the cons.
That's true. That would probably be my only con with the game, though. How about you?
My only con would be is that they came out with this really cool little expansion thing that has like nice plastic, or is it metal or plastic figures? I don't even know.
Plastic mold.
But plastic mold figures for some of the cards that you can buy for your deck, and then it has, you know, nice plastic molds for the factions that you make alliances with, as well as the troops. What's in the box isn't bad, but I mean, seeing those, and it's like, now that would have just made this a little nicer having like actual troops instead of just like square cubes. But you know what? It doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but that would be my one con.
Kind of moving into our overall ratings now, from 1 to 10, 10 being one of the best games you've ever played, 1 being complete garbage. Start with you, John?
Start with me?
Yeah. What's your rating?
All right. Well, this game really surprised me, and due to the fact that it includes like all these great game mechanics all in one box and like merges them together really well, I'm actually gonna give this a 10. I think this game's been really fun. Like, we've literally played it 3 times, and it's pretty much been the only game we've played the last 2 get-togethers. So, that's saying something for a game right out of the box.
And we've had plenty of other options at other games we could be playing now, especially for a review channel.
Right.
So that's saying a lot.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go with a 10.
That's solid. My rating is a 9.5 out of 10, and I feel really bad for giving it a 9.5. I think the upgrade pack and just some more, I don't know, more cards eventually will push this to a 10. I really do feel bad. I should be giving this game a 10. I'm just going to stick with that 9.5 for now, though, because I know that they can add more content to it.
Right.
And once they add more content, I guarantee this would be a 10 for me. It just seems like, you know, coming from the same designer as Clank, we played a lot of different variations of Clank. I feel like there's more cards to go through in Clank and a little bit more variation maybe. Like the stack isn't as big in this game.
True, but I would also argue that in this game you're not buying as many cards.
That's true. That's true.
Each turn, like, you have to be very careful with what you do put into your deck, because I think on average, you know, my deck's increased by 8 to 10 cards each time we've played, which isn't a ton.
Yeah.
And actually, theoretically, max, even if you bought 2 cards every turn, the most you could include tops would be like 20 extra cards. Yeah,
that's true. But I just felt like the base game itself is just, it's such a tight and nice and streamlined package that I feel like it is expandable and can give me more of what I love. And I guarantee it will be a 10 in the near future for me, but for right now, a 9.5, still extremely solid. Right. And not trying to spoil my games of the year list or anything, but I think this could be close to number 1 of the year.
I was going to say, does this get included with this year or next year now?
This would be for my 2020 list.
So we can start including this already.
Yes, yep. One other thing I could say, I guess, too, is the price point is a little bit steep for this game for what you get. It's a MSRP for $70, and the expansion or the upgrade pack will probably be around 50 to 55. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But definitely a game that's worth it. This game could be $500 and I'd still love it.
I don't know about that. But yeah, $70, I would say, yeah, this is definitely a fun game, and I think you're going to get your $70 worth out of it even after a few plays. So yeah. And as long as COVID goes, this game does have a solo mode that I have yet to try. Right. But I hear it's pretty decent too. So that wraps it up for today's video of our review of Dune Imperium, and you all have a great day.